A hush had fallen over Vatican City, not the silence of emptiness, but the stillness of something sacred. As the sun rose softly over the rooftops of Rome, the familiar rustle of pilgrims' feet, the distant echoes of choir rehearsal, the rhythm of the church itself, paused. Above the apostolic palace, the flags hung without motion, as if morning had stilled the very air. Then came the bells, not the chimes of ceremony, but of reverence. Each toll was like the breath of the soul of the church, deep, slow, grieving. The sound rolled across the Tiber River, out through the cobbled streets of Rome, and into the hearts of the faithful around the world. Something had ended. The voice of the church had fallen silent. Pope Francis, the spiritual father of over 1.3 billion Catholics, passed away in the early hours of the morning. He was 88. His departure was not marked by thunder or grand announcement. It came with gentleness, like a candle quietly extinguished in a cathedral at dawn. But in that stillness, the world began to stir. Because the man who had redefined what it meant to be pope had spoken, written, and wept his way into the hearts of nations. And he had left one final message behind. His health had weakened in recent months. A respiratory condition from his youth, long kept at bay, had returned with a vengeance. The world had seen him in his wheelchair, his steps slower, his voice more fragile. Yet he remained present, always present. Just days before his death, he continued meeting with visitors, blessing the sick, and writing by hand. His staff recall him saying, "I am tired, but the people are more tired than me." He believed his time was near, but instead of retreating into solitude, he leaned in with tenderness, not fear. He had always defied expectation. Born Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Buenos Aires to working-class immigrants, he never aspired to greatness. His early years were spent in ordinary work. He was once a nightclub bouncer, but the call of Christ pierced through his heart, and he entered the Jesuits. Decades later, he would become the first pope from the Americas, the first Jesuit to ever wear white, and the first pope in over a millennium not born in Europe. And from the moment he stepped onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica in 2013 and simply asked, "Pray for me," the world knew this papacy would be different. It was behind closed doors, in the modest guest house he had always preferred over the grandeur of the papal apartments, that Pope Francis wrote what would be his final message. It wasn't an encyclical. It wasn't a policy. It wasn't even meant for headlines. It was simply his soul, offered as a letter to the world. His aides say he wrote it late into the night, wrapped in prayer, pausing often to weep, not for himself, but for the world he was leaving behind. His handwriting trembled, his breath shallowed. His voice, once heard in thunderous arenas, had become a whisper. But what he said in those final lines carried more weight than all his speeches combined. He spoke of unity, not the kind born from politics or strategy, but from love. He pleaded for gentleness, not weakness, but courageous compassion. He warned that the greatest danger to humanity was not war, but spiritual indifference. And most of all, he wrote one final invitation: choose love while there is still time. There was no condemnation in his words, no accusation, only sorrow, only clarity, only truth. When the Vatican confirmed his passing, the world seemed to slow. In St. Peter's Square, no one needed to be summoned. They came by the thousands. Some brought candles, some brought flowers. Many brought nothing but their grief. From cathedrals in Europe, to dirt floor chapels in South America, from mountain monasteries in Asia to underground churches in Africa. The mourning was not bound by geography. It was global. It was personal. It was holy. This was not simply the death of a pope. It was the departure of a shepherd. For Pope Francis had not led with authority alone. He had led with empathy. He had kissed the hands of lepers, washed the feet of prisoners, dined with refugees, and embraced the mentally ill. He walked the alleys of slums. He challenged world leaders. He wept for the unborn and the elderly alike. And through all of it, he whispered to the world, "I am with you." Among the papers left neatly stacked on his desk in the Casa Santa Marta, one handwritten note stood out. It was brief. It bore no seal. It was not marked as urgent. But to those who read it, the message was unmistakable. The year 2025 will be a mirror. The world will not be judged by fire or war, but by what it chooses to love. This was not a prophecy of doom. There were no predictions of storms or signs in the sky. Instead, Pope Francis had offered something far more sobering, a spiritual threshold, a test not of the body, but of the heart. He believed the world was entering a time of profound decision. In private meetings with bishops and close confidants in his final weeks, he repeated it gently, with eyes full of sorrow. In 2025, humanity will be called, not by voices, but by silence, not by fear, but by love. And what it chooses in that silence will define everything that comes next. To him, it wasn't about global catastrophe. It was about spiritual famine, a kind of invisible unraveling, a world becoming numb to mercy, blind to beauty, comfortable with cruelty. He feared that unless something changed, the fabric of compassion that holds creation together would begin to tear, not by force, but by apathy. In one final, fragile meeting with a small circle of clergy, he said simply, "The great shaking will not come from the earth, but from within. When the love of many grows cold, even the church will tremble." That line, repeated and written down by those who heard it, became known quietly as the warning of the heart. It spread from diocese to diocese, not in panic, but in prayer. His final prophecy was not broadcast, it was whispered, preserved like sacred oil, passed from hand to hand, from heart to heart. He wrote it plainly. What begins in silence will echo through eternity. Underneath, he scribbled 4 words: watch, pray, choose, love. The message began to appear in churches, hospitals, seminaries, not from official decree, but from longing. It was not a call to prepare bunkers or fear headlines. It was a call to prepare the soul, to ask deeper questions. Will I choose mercy when it costs me something? Will I speak truth when it's easier to be silent? Will I love those who wound me? Will I remember the poor when the world forgets them? There was no Vatican press conference, no breaking news ticker, no official declaration from the Holy See. And yet, the message spread, like incense carried by wind. Priests in Lisbon began reading it aloud during morning mass. In a Nigerian village, children recited his 4 last words: watch, pray, choose, love, before class began. In a Seoul cathedral, a young bishop rewrote his homily to say, "The world does not need another decree. It needs a decision." This is the year of the great choice. The phrase caught on, quietly, reverently, across time zones and tongues. The year of the great choice. It wasn't a campaign. It wasn't organized. It was organic. It was a movement of the soul. And in the stillness, hearts began to stir. A man in Brazil reconciled with the father he hadn't spoken to in 20 years. A woman in France wrote a letter of forgiveness to the sister who had betrayed her. Teenagers in the Philippines started handing out food each Friday, not as a project, but as a prayer. They didn't quote the Pope. They simply said, "He showed us the way. Now it's our turn." Inside Vatican walls, preparations began for the conclave. Cardinals gathered, not only to choose a successor, but to sit beneath the long shadow of a man who had dared to lead by kneeling. His legacy wasn't about doctrine alone. It was about direction. It wasn't what he changed. It was what he awakened. In a candlelit chapel, the night before the conclave began, one cardinal whispered aloud what many were feeling. "This vote is not about who will wear the white. It is about who will carry the fire." There were no responses, only silence. But in that silence, something sacred was felt. Meanwhile, outside, the world was already moving, not with fear, but with resolve, because Pope Francis is. In the days following the funeral, the great basilicas of Rome remained crowded, not by tourists, but by pilgrims, not by spectators, but by seekers. Some came with questions, others with burdens. Many came in silence, but all were drawn by the same truth. A man had lived among us who made mercy believable again. And now he was gone. The bells tolled for him. The incense rose for him. The world wept for him. But what lingered more than grief was the echo of his footsteps through refugee camps, the echo of his trembling voice preaching mercy when power was demanded, the echo of 4 words scratched onto a scrap of paper, still sitting beside his bed: watch, pray, choose, love. Pope Francis is no longer here to guide the Church through this hour. But his words remain. His example remains. And the decision he set before us now belongs to us. Will we love when hatred is easier? Will we listen when noise surrounds us? Will we give when the world tells us to hoard? Will we walk with the wounded even when it slows us down? Because this prophecy is not about 2025. It's about every day that leads to it. Every moment you forgive. Every time you show kindness. Every time you choose humility over pride. Every time you say, "Not my will, but yours, Lord." Those are the moments that shape history. His body rests now, not in the grandeur of papal tombs, but in the heart of the city, in a place where the people can reach him. He asked not to be remembered if we carry his fire, he is not gone. If we remember the poor, he is not silent. If we forgive our enemies, he is not finished. Because a true shepherd doesn't live forever in flesh. He lives on in the love he leaves behind. This is not the end of Pope Francis's story. It is the beginning of ours. He taught us that the Church must not be a fortress, but a field hospital. He reminded us that holiness is not about distance, it's about presence. And now he invites us, across every country, language, and background, to rise and walk in that same spirit. The Church grows not by force, but by witness. So let us be that witness. Let us be the bridge where there are walls, the voice where there is silence, the warmth where the world has gone cold. Farewell, Holy Father. May your whisper become our anthem. May your compassion become our courage. And may your final prayer become the choice we now make every day. Amen. Amen.